At 78, I've learned something most men won't admit out loud. From the time we're boys, we're taught that desire is proof we're still men. That our worth is measured by what we can do behind closed doors. And when that part of life changes, when intimacy becomes complicated or stops, men don't just lose a habit, they lose a piece of their identity. But today, I'm telling you the truth no one talks about. I haven't touched my wife down there in 19 years. And what actually happened after wasn't what I expected.
I still remember the weight of Margaret's body against mine in our first apartment. That tiny place on Maple Street where the radiator clanked all night, and we didn't care because we generated our own heat. I was 25, she was 23, and I thought I understood exactly what it meant to be a husband. It meant keeping her satisfied. It meant those Sunday mornings when we'd stay in bed until noon. The way she'd look at me afterward with that particular softness in her eyes that made me feel 10 feet tall. That look was my report card, my proof of worth, my entire identity wrapped up in her wanting me. For 40 years, that's how our marriage worked. Not just the sex itself, but what it represented. The unspoken contract neither of us ever questioned. When things were good between us, the bedroom reflected it. When we fought, making love afterward was how we said sorry, without the messy vulnerability of actual words. I measured the health of our entire relationship by the frequency and enthusiasm of our physical connection. If Margaret reached for me in the dark, I was doing my job. If she turned away, I'd failed somehow. I thought that's what kept us together. That primal pull, that electricity, that proof that we still chose each other's bodies after decades of familiarity. I genuinely believed that when that fire went out, there'd be nothing left but two strangers sharing a mortgage. God, I was so wrong. The urologist had kind eyes when he told me. That's what I remember most. How carefully he chose his words, like he was diffusing a bomb instead of delivering medical news. The urologist said the surgery was successful in removing the cancer, Walter, but there were complications, nerve damage, the erectile function, it's unlikely to return. He said it so clinically, like he was telling me about a faulty carburetor instead of the end of my manhood. I was 59 years old. I'd spent 4 decades believing I knew exactly what made me worthy of my wife, and this man had just informed me that equipment was permanently out of service. Margaret picked me up from the hospital 3 days later. She held my hand in the car, kept asking if I was in pain, if I needed to stop for anything. I couldn't answer, couldn't look at her. All I could think was that I'd become something less than what she'd married, a husband in name only. I stared out the window at other men driving past, men who probably still worked, who could still give their wives what mine deserved, and felt something inside me calcify into shame. That night she brought me soup in bed, kissed my forehead, said we'd get through this together, and I wanted to believe her, but all I heard was the future tense. We'll get through this, like it was an obstacle we'd overcome. I didn't tell her what the doctor really said, that there was nothing to overcome. This was permanent. Margaret never complained. That somehow made it worse. She'd smile when I came home with another prescription, another device, another desperate solution promised by some specialist 3 towns over. "Whatever you need, honey," she'd say. and I'd hear what she wasn't saying, that she was watching me break myself trying to become whole again. I spent thousands of dollars that first year. Pills that did nothing but give me headaches. Injections that felt like admitting defeat every time I had to prepare them. A vacuum pump that sat in our bathroom cabinet like a monument to humiliation. Each failed attempt carved another layer off my sense of self. And Margaret would touch my shoulder afterward, whisper that it was okay, that we had time. But I could see something dimming behind her eyes. We stopped talking about it after month 6. Just stopped. The silence grew between us like a living thing, filling the spaces where honesty used to live. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes with this expression I couldn't read. Was it pity? Disappointment? Resignation? I never asked, because I was terrified of the answer. I started staying up later, watching television until she was asleep. Started finding reasons to work in the garage on weekends. Physical distance felt easier than emotional proximity. Because every time we were close, every time she touched my hand or leaned against me on the couch, I felt like a fraud, like I was accepting affection under false pretenses. The marriage wasn't ending. It was just hollowing out from the inside. It was a Tuesday night, 18 months after the surgery. I was heading to the garage again when Margaret's voice stopped me at the kitchen door. Not loud, just my name, Walt. The way she said it made me turn around. She was standing by the sink with her arms wrapped around herself, and there were tears on her face. Not the angry kind, the exhausted kind. The kind that come from holding something too heavy for too long. I can't do this anymore, she said. My stomach dropped. This was it, the conversation I'd been dreading. She was finally going to say what I'd been thinking, that this wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough, that she deserved more than what remained of me. I miss you, she said, and her voice cracked. I don't miss the sex, Walt. I miss you, my husband, my best friend, the man who used to talk to me, who used to look at me, who used to be here even when he was standing right in front of me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. You think I care about what you can't do anymore? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I care that you've disappeared, that you've decided I'm so shallow, so selfish, that I'd only love you for one thing, that after 40 years together, you don't know me at all. The shame I'd been carrying for 18 months cracked open, because she wasn't grieving what I thought she was grieving. She was grieving me. The first time I held Margaret's hand after that conversation, I felt like a teenager who didn't know the rules. We were watching television 3 days later, and she reached over, laced her fingers through mine. My entire body tensed, because for 40 years that gesture had been the opening move in a familiar dance. Now it was just itself, just her hand in mine. No promise, no expectation, no script to follow. You can relax, she whispered. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to hold your hand. It took weeks before I could touch her without the weight of apology, without feeling like I was accepting something under false pretenses. She'd kiss me goodnight, and I'd freeze, waiting for disappointment to cross her face when nothing followed. But nothing was supposed to follow. That was the entire point. We had to relearn each other's bodies as if we'd never touched before. Her head on my shoulder while we read the paper, my arm around her waist when we cooked dinner, the small of her back under my palm when I'd pass behind her in the kitchen. Touch that existed for its own sake, not as currency or prelude or proof of anything. The strangest part was discovering how much I'd missed this. Simple physical closeness without performance anxiety, without keeping score, without the pressure of what had to come next. I'd spent decades treating affection as foreplay. I'd forgotten it could be the entire sentence.
About 6 months after Margaret's breakdown, we started staying up late talking. Not about groceries or bills or whose turn it was to call the kids. Real talking. The kind we hadn't done since we were young and still thought we had mysteries to share with each other. One night she told me she'd always wanted to learn piano, but never mentioned it because she thought I'd find it foolish. I told her I'd been terrified of retirement for 15 years because I didn't know who I was without work defining me. These weren't small confessions. They were pieces of ourselves we'd kept hidden because somewhere along the way we'd stopped believing the other person wanted to know. I began to realize we'd been living parallel lives for decades, sharing a bed, a mortgage, a last name, but not our actual interior worlds. The sex had created an illusion of intimacy, a shortcut that made us feel connected without doing the harder work of actually knowing each other. We'd mistake physical familiarity for emotional understanding. "What did you dream about when you were a girl?" I asked her one evening. She looked surprised, like no one had asked her that in 50 years. Maybe no one had. Maybe I'd been too busy wanting her body to care about her mind. We talked until 2 in the morning that night, and when we finally went to bed, I felt closer to her than I had after 1,000 nights of physical passion. Because she'd let me see her, not just touch her. We started having coffee on the back porch every morning at 6:30. Not because anyone told us to, but because one day Margaret brought 2 cups outside and said, "Sit with me." That was 4 years after the surgery. Now, 15 years later, I can't imagine starting a day without those 45 minutes of watching the sun come up while she tells me about the dream she had, or I complain about my knees. It sounds small, I know, coffee on a porch, but it became the architecture of our new marriage. We started cooking dinner together instead of her doing it while I watched the news. I'd chop vegetables while she told me stories about her mother I'd never heard. She'd stir the sauce while I finally admitted how scared I'd been when our daughter moved across the country. The kitchen became our confessional. Thursday nights we read aloud to each other, mystery novels mostly. She does the dialogue better than me, gives each character a voice. I focus on the descriptive parts. We take turns choosing the books. Last month she picked a romance novel, and I didn't complain once. These rituals, mundane, unsexy, utterly ordinary, became the foundation of something I'd never experienced in our first 40 years together. Presence without performance. Connection without conquest. The revolutionary act of simply being with someone instead of doing something to them or for them. I wasn't performing masculinity anymore. I was just being Walt, and Margaret was just being Margaret. Together. So here I am at 78, sitting at this kitchen table with my coffee and newspaper, and my wife of 53 years is still asleep upstairs. 19 years without sex. And the truth nobody prepared me for is this. I know Margaret more deeply now than I did in all those passionate decades before. I know how she takes her coffee has changed 3 times in 20 years. I know the specific way her voice sounds when she's about to cry but doesn't want to. I know her fears her regrets, her small joys that have nothing to do with me. I know her as a complete person, not just as the woman who wanted me. The masculinity I thought I'd lost, I didn't lose it. I just discovered it had nothing to do with what I thought it did. Being a man isn't about your body's performance. It's about your willingness to show up honestly, to choose vulnerability over pride, to love someone for who they are instead of what they can give you. What actually happens after the sex stops? You finally get the chance to meet your wife. Really meet her. And if you're brave enough to stay, you might discover that everything you thought you'd lost was just making room for something infinitely better.